Hello, and welcome to the SOC-280 podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Brockmeyer, and today we're going to be talking about a rather controversial welfare policy and its potential to help improve the mental and physical health of those most left out by our current economic and healthcare system, as well as the feasibility of its implementation. Universal Basic Income, or UBI, is essentially what it sounds like. Every citizen of a nation with UBI receives a fixed salary simply for existing. It doesn't matter if they're freshly 18 and still living at home, or if they're entering their 20th year of practice at the hospital. They all receive a set amount of money each month to spend however they please. If this sounds radical, that's because it is. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is a health-based podcast, and it may not yet be clear how giving people free money correlates to better health, especially in Western Europe or North America. A randomized control study by Stacia West and Amy Castro was conducted in California from 2019 to 2021. 200 individuals were the control, and 131 were the treatment group, which received monthly payments of $500 from February 2019 to January of 2021. The study found that those receiving a guaranteed basic income of $500 per month had greater financial stability and better psychological and physical health, even during the pandemic. 6 months after the payments ended, there was no longer any significant difference between the control and treatment's assessments of emotional well-being, fatigue, pain, or physical functioning. What's great about this is that randomized control trials are the gold standard for determining causal relationships, so the results of this study are significant and will hopefully be replicated in more studies in North America and Europe. A 2024 study by Rachel Thompson and her associates, though not a randomized control trial, showed promising results for a simulated implementation of UBI in the UK. The findings stated that an improvement in the mental health of citizens primarily hinged on whether they chose to stay employed after receiving UBI, which, by the way, the future of employment levels under UBI will be discussed later on. Now, as for randomized control studies, the benefits of such experiments are compounded in poorer countries and tend to be replicated in countries with high poverty rates. For example, a 2021 review by Rashmi Gupta and his colleagues examines 2 UNICEF-funded studies conducted in 2011 that had men and women in Madhya Pradesh receiving an allowance of 200 rupees. Participants reported using the money to improve the material conditions of their bathrooms, living quarters, roofs, and to purchase items like nets to protect against malaria contraction. When the allowance increased to 300 rupees, the same spending patterns continued along with improved nutrition. So, circling back, what we know now is that UBI has been shown to decrease the overall stress that people experience from trying to eat and pay rent and still enjoy their time here on Earth. But what needs to be questioned is how will simply reducing stress lead to positive long-term health outcomes? The impact that low socioeconomic status and stress have on the body can increase the risk of other diseases later in life. Researchers Sheldon Cohen, Peter Gianaros, and Stephen Minuk published a model of stress and disease outcomes in 2016 that explains how epidemiological, psychological, and biological analyses of stress can unite to explain the risk for disease onset or progression. When someone is constantly facing economic stressors like inflation and job instability, the worry or stress they feel manifests itself physiologically by the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which tells your body, hey, this is scary, we need to do something about this. When your HPA and other stress response mechanisms are activated over and over again, the signaling throughout your body can manifest in higher blood sugar and plaque buildup in your arteries. Now, a little side note, you may have heard the term weathering to describe this phenomenon before, which was coined by Dr. Arlene Geronimus in a 1992 publication that attempted to explain the appearance of accelerated aging in Black women demonstrated by pregnancy outcomes for different age groups. While Geronimus's paper focused on discrimination as the primary source of stress, other studies have since added that socioeconomic status can be a large contributor. A 2005 publication by Leonard Perlin and his associates discusses stress proliferation, or the tendency of prior stressors in an individual's life to create new ones in the future. So, for example, if someone without insurance falls ill and cannot work for a month, they will not only have to worry about paying for treatment, but also worry about paying for rent, groceries, perhaps providing for a child. Stress proliferation is a nasty positive feedback loop that can ruin someone's chances at achieving economic and physical well-being. Additionally, a 2022 study by Shakira Saglia and others examines the correlation between childhood socioeconomic status, childhood adversities or traumas, and adult socioeconomic status. In the study, childhood adversities, or CAs, are defined as experiences that put the child's bodily, social, or familial safety in danger and include exposures to addiction, crime, neglect, and other maltreatments or abuses. Findings indicated a negative correlation between increasing socioeconomic status and incidence of CAs. Childhood socioeconomic status was also directly correlated with adult status, and for white and black Americans, CAs mediated the correlation between child and adult socioeconomic status. Though this was not observed in Latino and Asian Americans, childhood status still predicted the status as in adults. These studies indicate that those with lower income, which are usually women and or minorities, are more likely to experience traumas in both their childhood and adult life, which can proliferate into new stressors farther down the line. It's these populations in a society that have the most to gain from the implementation of a universal basic income. Unfortunately, the healthcare delivery system in the United States puts these populations at a disadvantage via its hyper-individualistic approach. Our healthcare system fails to consider any of the structural determinants of health in favor of placing all responsibility on patients. It's no surprise then that there have been ever-increasing calls for creating a system that not only acknowledges but underscores the structural factors that play a role in health outcomes. The 2024 paper by Dr. Eric Reinhart illustrates a possible solution where a secured basic income is able to interrupt the cycle of stress proliferation and generational poverty, which can then prevent the disproportionate rates of stress and low socioeconomic status observed in minorities. He compares implementing a UBI to the increased coverage and monetary amount of the federal child tax credit in 2021. The expansion of the child tax credit saw significant decline in symptoms of anxiety and depression in recipients, as well as improved nutrition and an instant drop in hospitalizations due to child abuse or neglect. If a UBI program similar to the expanded tax credit were able to produce similar results, then both childhood adversities and socioeconomic status would be decreased and increased, respectively. The goal of achieving health equity in the United States would see the greatest step forward in decades. Of course, there's certainly reason as to why programs like this aren't already ubiquitous. There's no corporate cash incentive to more radical social programs like a universal basic income, and conservatives all around the globe have combated such policies for decades. Opponents of UBI argue that it rewards laziness or that recipients would be disincentivized to continue working. A 2018 paper by Richard Gilbert and others discusses how the actions of lottery winners are sometimes cited as evidence that people who are guaranteed a source of income will either cut back on regular working hours or leave the workforce entirely. However, the paper also recognizes lottery winners that used their earnings to advance their educations and invest in their careers. Furthermore, long-standing psychological research and theories support the idea that UBI would have minimal, if any, negative impact on work ethic. Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests that when the most basic needs like food, shelter, and clothing are met, individuals can focus on achieving other needs such as self-actualization, often by pursuing a career. After going over the psychological theories in support of UBI, the Gilbert paper conducted a review of 16 prior studies that measured hours worked and labor participation rate, or the proportion of the adult population actively employed or seeking employment. Comparing before and after the implementation of a UBI program, they found no significant reduction in the labor participation rate or hours worked per week. In fact, a handful of studies saw an increase in work activity. This was mostly observed in developing or previously colonized countries like India, Bangladesh, and Uganda. Another possible snag in the implementation of UBI in capitalist countries like the US is the cultural stigma associated with social support. Dr. Eric Reinhardt notes that it is incredibly difficult and demoralizing to obtain social support before the age of retirement. In turn, the aforementioned positive feedback loops of poverty, stress, and negative health outcomes continue unhampered. A 2023 study conducted in the UK by Matthew Johnson and Associates observed that populations with the lowest socioeconomic status, those who stood to benefit the most from a UBI-type program, also tended to have the lowest levels of trust in their government. They understood their struggles but did not believe that a federal welfare program would be able to alleviate them. However, context is important. This study still found a majority support for a UBI program among politically conservative responders, which is not necessarily reproducible in the United States. The UK has a form of socialized medicine, which would be considered absolutely radical if introduced in US legislature. In short, having a universal basic income would be pretty cool. The vast majority of people would use it to advance their education and stabilize not only their home life, but their health down the road. Whether we'll ever see any large-scale implementations in the US is up in the air, although if we had to make a bet, I'd say probably not. Well, that's all we have for you today at SOC-280. This is Danielle Brockmeyer, signing off.